I was elbow-deep in grease, fixing the gate motor on my front fence when the white BMW screeched to a stop in front of my ranch, the kind of high-maintenance car that screams HOA board member. And sure enough, out stepped the queen herself. Odessa Kensington. She had the haircut, the clipboard, and the attitude. "Excuse me," she barked, marching up like she owned the world. "Are you Trevor Raines?" "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" She didn't even introduce herself. Just shoved a stapled packet into my chest like she was serving a court summons. "This is an official notice from the Maple Hills HOA board. We've reviewed your property and decided it's a blight on the community aesthetic. You have 30 days to vacate and accept our purchase offer. We're expanding the neighborhood trail system." I blinked. "Come again. You're sitting on 18 acres that border our community. This old ranch doesn't fit the neighborhood's vision. The board voted unanimously to buy you out." I laughed. "You're serious?" Odessa narrowed her eyes. "This is not a joke. You'll find our offer to be more than generous. $200,000 for all 18 acres. Now, I hadn't laughed that hard since my cousin Zane tried to fix a septic tank with Gorilla Glue. "Lady, that land's worth 7 figures easy, and even if it wasn't, I'm not selling. I've lived here 22 years, she huffed. "You'll regret that decision. The HOA has ways of making things uncomfortable." She turned on her heel and stomped back to her car like she'd just thrown down an Uno reverse card. The tires squealed as she drove off, probably to harass someone about decorative gnomes. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly imagined, is that I wasn't just some stubborn rancher with a truck and a grudge. I owned the entire Maple Hills development. Every inch of it sat on land I leased to a developer 15 years ago. They built their cookie-cutter homes, paved their winding roads, and then signed it all over to the HOA once it was complete. But the land underneath, still mine. Still under a little clause in the lease that gave me full ownership of the mineral rights, easements, and get this, the option to terminate occupancy if the HOA ever violated their zoning agreements. They had no idea. And now they were trying to kick me off my own land. Odessa Kensington just picked a fight with the wrong guy, and I was about to burn the whole HOA down one clause at a time. The next move came quicker than I expected. 3 days after Odessa's little drive-by declaration, I got a knock on the door just after sunrise. I opened it to find a tall guy in a county uniform holding a clipboard, flanked by 2 more in reflective vests. They looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning," the lead one said. "You Trevor Raines?" "That's me. We're here to conduct a mandatory inspection. We received multiple reports of code violations on this property. Tall grass, unsafe fencing, improper storage of machinery, that sort of thing." I stepped outside, arms crossed. "Funny, county hasn't inspected this land since 2014. Who exactly reported these violations?" He hesitated. "Complaints came through the Maple Hills HOA. They claimed this property endangers their community's safety. And that triggered an emergency inspection before 8 in the morning." He didn't answer, just glanced away and motioned to his guys. "Let's get started." I didn't stop them. I had nothing to hide. What I did do was pull out my phone and start recording. They walked the perimeter, snapping photos of my barn, the tractor parked alongside it, and even the chicken coop. One of them tried measuring the fence line, but I knew they wouldn't find anything out of place. The fence was new, professionally installed last summer to exact county specs. By the time they finished, I could tell they were starting to feel awkward about the whole thing. "Look," the first guy said, pulling me aside, "off the record, this reeks. We've seen this kind of thing before. HOA pressures the county, tries to bury someone in inspections until they fold." "They picked the wrong guy," I said. He nodded toward the clipboard. "You'll get a formal report in the mail, but you're in the clear. Nothing actionable here. Appreciate that." As they pulled away, I spotted Odessa's BMW parked 2 blocks down, half hidden behind a hedge. She was watching with binoculars. I gave her a slow, exaggerated thumbs up. She sped off. Later that afternoon, I dug through my safe and pulled out the original land use agreement signed by the developer, notarized and sealed by the county clerk. I scanned it into my computer and emailed a copy to my lawyer, Rebecca Linwood, a firebrand real estate attorney I'd known since she helped me shut down an illegal hunting lease on my back pasture 5 years ago. 20 minutes later, she called. "Trevor, this is gold," she said. "They have no clue what they're messing with. You still paying the property taxes on the land under Maple Hills?" "Every year," I said. "Auto-drafted out of my ranch account." "Then nothing's changed. The HOA's got no authority to expand or annex anything without submitting a zoning petition." "And guess who has to approve that petition?" "Let me guess me. Bingo. You're listed as the primary stakeholder on the parcel. You could bulldoze that whole subdivision tomorrow if you wanted to, assuming you followed proper procedure." "Not my style," I said. "I want them to hang themselves with their own rope." Rebecca chuckled. "Then let's give them as much rope as they want." The next morning, I started documenting everything: photos, videos, time-stamped logs of every interaction. I installed 2 new motion sensor cameras facing the road and the eastern property line. Not because I was paranoid, but because I knew how these people operated. Odessa wasn't going to take no for an answer, and I wasn't going to wait around for her next move. It came 2 nights later. I woke up to the smell of smoke. Not a house fire, something more subtle. Acrid, chemical. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out the back door, boots half-laced. The field behind my barn was smoldering. Someone had tossed a flare into the dry grass, trying to start a fire that could have taken out half the property if the wind had been stronger. I called the fire department. They showed up fast, got the fire under control, and confirmed what I already suspected. "This wasn't accidental," the chief said. "Flare was military grade, not something you pick up at a gas station." I gave them the footage from the new cameras. It showed a dark SUV pulling up just before midnight. A figure in a hoodie stepped out, ran toward the fence line, threw something, and bolted. The license plate was partially visible. Enough for the sheriff's office to trace it. That's when everything took a turn. The SUV was registered to Mark Felden, Maple Hills HOA's treasurer. They arrested him within 24 hours. Turns out, Felden had a sealed record. Arson as a teenager, expunged after a diversion program. When the sheriff's office searched his garage, they found more flares, bolt cutters, and a binder labeled Raines Property Transition Plan. Inside were printed maps, timelines, and a copy of the same lowball offer Odessa had handed me. The plan outlined steps to encourage surrender of property through escalating pressure and community engagement. I got a call from the sheriff himself. "Trevor, we're treating this as a coordinated criminal conspiracy. If you're willing to press charges, this won't stop with Felden. We'll subpoena HOA meeting minutes, financial records, everything." "I'm more than willing," I said. Within a week, subpoenas went out. The sheriff's department raided the HOA's main office, just 2 rented rooms above a smoothie shop on Main Street. They seized hard drives, printed ledgers, and Odessa's personal laptop. What they found was worse than I expected. The HOA had been running a side fund completely off the books, fueled by fabricated fines and assessment fees they'd been charging new homeowners. The money was funneled through a dummy landscaping company registered in Odessa's nephew's name. Dozens of residents had been strong-armed into paying for phony violations. Mailbox heights, lawn edging, even the color of patio furniture. Every cent went into the slush fund earmarked for strategic acquisitions, meaning me. The sheriff's office held a town hall at the middle school auditorium, and I made sure to sit in the front row. Half the neighborhood showed up, confused and angry. Sheriff Nolan took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we've uncovered a pattern of financial misconduct, coercion, and attempted arson linked to members of your HOA board. This investigation is ongoing, but we have enough evidence to recommend criminal charges against multiple individuals." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Odessa wasn't there. She'd gone silent since the raid, but her name was on every document they found. After the meeting, a woman approached me mid-30s, tired eyes, holding a little girl by the hand. "You're Mr. Raines, right?" she asked. "That's right. I just wanted to say thank you. They fined me $800 last year for having a cloth swing set, said it was a safety hazard. I couldn't fight it. I thought I was alone." "You're not," I said. "Nobody has to take that kind of abuse." By the end of the week, 5 board members had resigned. Odessa hadn't been arrested yet, but the district attorney was circling. The county froze the HOA's accounts, and a court-appointed receiver started combing through the rest of their records. Rebecca called me again. "Trevor, this is going to make the news. You want to give a statement or let the DA handle it?" "I'll let the facts do the talking," I said. "But I do want one thing." "What's that?" "I want the HOA dissolved, permanently." She paused. "We can make that happen." And just like that, the ranch stayed right where it was, and the people who thought they could steal it learned what happens when you try to bully the landowner who holds the ground under your feet. The following Monday, Rebecca called me again, her voice crisp like she'd been up since dawn stacking evidence. "I've got something," she said. "The HOA's bylaws were amended last year without a proper quorum, no vote, no notice to residents. They used that illegal amendment to start collecting redevelopment fees. That alone is enough to void their charter." I stepped out onto the porch, watching a group of kids pedal down the trail that skirted my property line. "Can we prove it?" "Already did." I pulled the county recording log. "They never filed the revised bylaws. On paper, they don't exist." I nodded to myself. "Then we go for dissolution." "That's the plan, but there's more." The receiver found a second account in a Delaware bank. Guess who authorized it? Odessa. Under a fake consulting LLC. They've been laundering resident payments through shell companies. It's wire fraud, Trevor. That night, I met with Sheriff Nolan again, this time at the courthouse annex. He pulled a folder out of his briefcase and slid it across the table. "State investigators flagged transfers going back 3 years, he said. "The board rerouted over $400,000 through that Delaware account. The paper trail leads straight to Odessa and 2 other board members, Miriam Delaney and Victor Hatch." He flipped the folder open. Inside were screenshots of bank transfers, notarized forms, even a forged vendor contract for community development consulting. "They took money from working families," Nolan said, his voice low. "Then used it to bankroll their land grab." I leaned forward. "What happens next?" "The DA's office is preparing charges. Fraud, racketeering, conspiracy. We're talking real prison time." I glanced at one of the documents. It was a letter Odessa had sent to a title company, falsely claiming to represent all adjacent landowners. She'd tried to initiate a purchase agreement on my land using forged signatures from non-existent families. That crossed a line. "They tried to steal it on paper," I said. "When intimidation didn't work, they went for forgery." Nolan nodded. "We've got enough to indict." The next morning, 3 unmarked cruisers rolled into Maple Hills. Odessa was taken from her home in cuffs wearing a silk robe and house slippers. Victor Hatch was arrested at his law office downtown. Miriam Delaney was picked up at a country club luncheon. The news hit local media within hours. Channel 8 ran the headline. "HOA corruption scandal unfolds in Maple Hills. Fraud, fires, and forgery." I didn't talk to reporters. I didn't give interviews, but I did post one thing on the neighborhood bulletin board outside the rec center. A single sheet of paper, laminated against the wind, it read, "Know your rights, know your land." That evening, I got a surprise visit. A man in his early 60s with thick carpenter's hands and a sunburned neck knocked on my gate. He introduced himself as Joseph Lannery, the original contractor who'd built half the homes in Maple Hills before retiring. "I've been watching this mess unfold," he said. "Thought you might want to see something." He handed me a tattered folder. Inside were blueprints, dated receipts, and a signed addendum to the original construction contract. It detailed structural shortcuts the board had insisted on to save money, things like thinner foundation pads and unreinforced retaining walls. "They pushed me hard to cut corners," Joseph said. "I refused on the first 20 homes. They fired me after that." "Why tell me now?" "Because I've still got friends in those houses. They deserve to know what they're standing on." Rebecca reviewed the documents and sent them straight to the county building inspector. Within days, officials began surveying several Maple Hills properties. They found 4 retaining walls at risk of collapse and 2 homes with foundational sinking, both built during the same phase Joseph had been removed from. The receiver issued an emergency advisory, and the county slapped the HOA with a negligence violation. But by then, the HOA was just a name on a crumbling sign. The final court hearing came 6 weeks later. I sat in the gallery beside a few dozen residents, most of them young couples and retirees, all of them tired. Odessa's lawyer tried to argue that the board had acted in the community's best interest. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with no patience for theatrics, cut him off mid-sentence. "This board fabricated violations, laundered payments, initiated forgery, and endangered public safety," she said. "There is no best interest here. There is only fraud." She declared the Maple Hills HOA dissolved effective immediately. A court-appointed trustee would manage essential services until residents voted on a new structure or none at all. Outside the courthouse, a woman I'd never met before approached me. She was holding a toddler on her hip and had a reusable grocery bag slung over one shoulder. "You're Mr. Raines," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. My husband's in the reserves. We got fined last year for flying an American flag without proper framing. We paid it because we didn't know we could fight it." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "This was your fight too." "You just didn't know it yet." She glanced back toward the courthouse. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you all get to choose what kind of community you want to live in without someone telling you what color mailbox to buy." A week later, I hosted a community gathering on the ranch. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just long tables, covered dishes, and folding chairs under a string of lights. Kids ran through the grass. Dogs chased sticks. Older folks swapped stories over lemonade. I watched from the porch, arms crossed, coffee in hand. Rebecca joined me after sunset, handing me a vanilla cupcake and a paper plate. "You know," she said, "you could turn this into something bigger. Landowner rights, HOA reform, you've already got people listening." "I don't need a stage," I said. "I just need peace on my land." She looked out over the crowd. "You got it back." "No," I said. "We took it back." The residents formed a new neighborhood committee, not an HOA, just a volunteer group to handle snow removal and pool cleaning, no fines, no secret accounts. Just neighbors helping neighbors. As for the ranch, I finished fencing the north pasture and planted a new line of pines along the trail. The gate stayed open most days. People waved when they passed. Some even stopped to ask about the history of the land, and I told them about my grandfather who built the barn with his own hands and the old well that still ran clear. Odessa and her former board members faced trial the following spring. The charges stuck. They took plea deals. Restitution was ordered. Some residents got their money back, others got closure. But the most lasting thing wasn't in court documents or bank statements. It was a little wooden sign someone nailed to the trailhead beside my pasture. No one claimed credit, but I had a good idea who did it. It read, "Respect the land, respect each other, or get run off the trail." The first rain of spring came the morning Odessa's sentencing was handed down. I was repairing a broken irrigation pipe near the orchard when Rebecca called not to talk about the hearing, but to tell me the county clerk had just processed my petition to reclaim formal zoning control over the Maple Hills development. "The trustee managing the former HOA has already signed off," she said. "It's official. You now control all land use decisions for the entire subdivision. You're not just the landowner anymore, you're the sole zoning authority." I leaned back on my heels, water still pooling around the pipe. That'll make them nervous. They'll be more than nervous, she said. You've got leverage now, real leverage. There was no anger in her voice, just satisfaction, the slow, deliberate kind earned only through precision and patience. Later that afternoon, I drove into town not to attend the sentencing, but to meet with Councilwoman Vera Martinez. She'd reached out a few days prior, asking to hear more about what had happened beneath the surface of the HOA collapse. We met at a diner halfway between Town Hall and the edge of my property, a quiet place with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I've been getting letters, she said, flipping through a manila folder as we sat down. Residents from Maple Hills. Some asking for help, others trying to understand what comes next. They've been through a lot, I said. They need time, structure without control, community without enforcement. Vera nodded. I've reviewed the redevelopment plans the old board submitted over the years. They were ambitious. Too ambitious. Half the proposals weren't even legal. They thought no one would check, I said. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Did you know they applied for a federal resilience grant to build a multi-use community center on your pasture? No. They submitted fake environmental impact studies, claimed you'd already agreed to donate the land. I felt the edge of my jaw tighten. Who signed that application? Victor Hatch, she said. But Odessa forwarded it. It's all in the file. I took a breath. That's a felony. Already flagged it to the district attorney, she said. You'll probably be asked to testify. Before I left, she handed me a scanned copy of the grant application. I read the first page and immediately recognized the signature line. The name used for consent. T. Raines. One letter off mine. They'd forged permission on a federal document. At the courthouse that evening, the judge gave Odessa 3 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 18 months. Victor and Miriam received 2 years probation and were barred from serving on any community board for life. The rest of the former board scattered like leaves in the wind, but the story wasn't over. The forged grant application triggered a federal investigation. The Office of the Inspector General sent 2 agents to my ranch 2 weeks later. They were polite, well-prepared, and asked pointed questions about any other documents I believed might have been falsified using my name or property. I gave them everything, including a copy of an old email Odessa had sent me before the first land buyout attempt. A line in that email matched the phrasing used in the grant application exactly. The investigation widened. More residents came forward with stories they hadn't told anyone about pressured signatures, threats to withhold community access, and in one case, a woman whose mortgage renewal was obstructed after she refused to endorse a development proposal. 6 months into the investigation, a second wave of indictments landed. Odessa was charged federally for submitting falsified documentation to a federal agency, and Victor was added to the new case for wire fraud. Their sentencing would now fall under federal jurisdiction, and the penalties were steeper. But something else happened during this time, something more meaningful than courtrooms or headlines. The neighborhood started planting its own roots. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, the residents held monthly potlucks, organized a tool-sharing board, and created a rotating volunteer crew to handle basic maintenance. And unlike before, it was all optional. One evening, I was walking the fence line when a teenager from the neighborhood jogged up to the gate. She introduced herself as Elise, said she was a high school junior and working on a civics project. "I'm writing about zoning and land ownership," she said. "Can I ask you a couple questions?" "Sure," I said. She pulled out a spiral notebook. "Do you think communities need HOAs?" "No," I said. "I think communities need clarity and the right to choose how they live without fear." She wrote that down word for word. "Why didn't you just sell when they asked?" "This land's been in my family longer than that neighborhood's been on any map," I said. "Selling because someone else wants it just doesn't sit right." She nodded, thoughtful. "They said you were just being stubborn." "They always say that," I said. right up until they get caught lying. At the end of the school year, I got a letter from Elise's teacher. She'd won a regional essay contest with her piece titled, "The Land Beneath the Law, a True Story of One Man's Fight for Community Integrity." I pinned it to the bulletin board in my barn. By fall, Councilwoman Vera introduced a new ordinance requiring full transparency and quarterly audits for any HOA operating within the county. It passed unanimously. One of the provisions was named after me. The Raines Clause, which prohibited HOAs from initiating land acquisition without a 2/3 vote from all affected property owners and validation by a public notary. The clause was later adopted by 2 other counties. Across Maple Hills, the effects were visible. Fences were painted colors that hadn't been allowed before. Solar panels went up without protest. One family even turned their front yard into a vegetable patch, complete with raised beds and a handmade compost bin. Freedom was messy. But it was theirs. I spent the winter restructuring the pasture runoff system and finally built the greenhouse my grandfather had always talked about. In the evenings, I'd see porch lights glowing across the trail, not in uniformity but in rhythm. Some white, some amber, some a little too bright. But they were lit by choice. One night, a knock came at my door. It was Thomas, a new resident who'd moved in after the collapse of the HOA. He brought a 6-pack and a folded piece of paper. "They're organizing a community festival," he said. "First one without permits, fees, or dress codes. Just food, music, and maybe a dunk tank." I raised an eyebrow. "A dunk tank?" "Yeah," he said. "Someone suggested putting a cardboard cutout of Odessa on it." I laughed. "I'll donate the plywood." He handed me the paper. It was the flyer for the festival, hand-drawn by kids and photocopied at the library. At the bottom was a list of contributors. My name was third. "I didn't sign this," I said. "You didn't have to," he said. "We just figured you'd be there, and I was." I grilled ribs while a local band played on a makeshift stage built from hay bales and pallets. Kids splashed in a plastic pool. Adults danced barefoot on the grass. No one gave orders. No one handed out violations. No one needed to be in charge. Later that evening, I stood by the trailhead beneath that same wooden sign someone had once nailed there. The words were faded now, but still clear: respect the land. Respect each other. That night, I added something to it. Just 3 words carved into the bottom plank with my pocket knife. Never again controlled. And as I stepped back, I realized it wasn't just a message for new residents. It was a warning for anyone who ever thought power was permanent, because they'd forgotten one thing: the land remembers.